Research Officer at Municipal License Standards.
And I'm Fiona Benedam. I'm a supervisor with Municipal Licensing and Standards Animal Services.
And welcome to our public consultation on prohibited animals regulations in Toronto. Just so you know, you can participate through Facebook by sending us your questions. Don't forget to use the hashtag #AnimalRulesTO. My colleagues Angelica Santos and Amy Aguilera will be answering your questions. Just for the agenda for the evening, we're going to start off with a staff presentation at 6:30. After the presentation, which will wrap around 7, we'll start off with the questions from people who are in the audience, as well as your questions from home. So please participate.
Send us your questions.
Yeah. To Prohibited Animals Public Consultations, and welcome to everybody who's at home, wherever they are, on Facebook Live. For those of you who are at Facebook Live, or anyone in the room who wants to participate, the hashtag is #TO. Let me get the hashtag right. #AnimalRulesTO. If you want to participate on Facebook Live, the stream is happening on Toronto Animal Services page. My name is Mohammed Shuri. I'm the Senior Policy and Research Officer of Municipal License Standards, and I'll have my colleagues who are here with me today introduce themselves. So we'll start with Fiona.
I'm Fiona Benedam. I'm a supervisor with Toronto Animal Services.
And I'm Vanessa Fletcher. I'm the Manager in Policy with Municipal Licensing and Standards.
I'm Andrew Lentini with the Toronto Zoo.
Jennifer Tracy with the Toronto Zoo. Mohammed Nani with Municipal Licensing and Standards. Sorry? I'm with MLS as well.
Oh, I'm Angelica Santos. I'm with Strategic Communications for the City of Toronto.
Hi, I'm Kim Smithers, Supervisor of Toronto Animal Services.
I'm Dylan. I'm also with Municipal Licensing and Standards.
Hello, Amy Aguilera from MLS as well.
Perfect. So we're going to get started on our public consultations. In terms of the agenda, we just backtrack. For anybody on Facebook Live, you can send us your questions and we'll answer them along the way. And for everybody in the room, we'll get to a question and answer period later on. And in terms of the agenda, we're going to start off with a staff presentation that should take no more than 15 to 20 minutes. And then we'll break out into a question and answer period. And after that, we'll wrap up with our next steps and what's going to happen in terms of the report being produced. In terms of a little bit of a background, the City of Toronto is here today to seek input from the public, business owners who handle prohibited animals that are currently prohibited in the City of Toronto, and animal welfare groups on two key questions. One of them is around formalizing the process to add or remove animals from the prohibited animals list. And the second one is around the identifying the extent of the use of prohibited animals for temporary activities such as educational programming at birthday parties, parades, or other reasons, and potentially making recommendations to regulate these uses. Your feedback will help to inform the staff report, which will be presented to the Licensing and Standards Committee for the June 14th meeting. And just quick housekeeping, I forgot to mention, but bathrooms or restrooms are out the door to your right, and there's also a water fountain out the door to your left and then to your right again. I can repeat that later on, and if you need any assistance, please let me know. So what were the council directives that staff were given? Staff were given 2 directives by council. One was to conduct further research and public consultations and to report back to Licensing and Standards Committee on expanding the list of prohibited animals to include snakes, flamingos, and other animals, as well as generally looking at a process by which animals go on or off the list. Secondly, staff were directed to conduct stakeholder and public consultations, including consultations with the Toronto Zoo on the extent of and the use of prohibited animals in education programs in Toronto, and to report back to the Licensing Standards Committee by July 1st, 2017. Well, what's the process and the timeline? Staff started in December 2016. Between January and March, we've been doing research and analysis, and now in May, we have done public consultations and we'll be doing stakeholder engagement. And the report is to go hopefully sometime in June 2017. So what's the consultation plan? Staff have had stakeholder input with business owners who have prohibited animals. We will be organizing a stakeholder input with animal welfare groups. And And this is the second of two public consultations. The first one was held April 28th, and the public consultation today. But you can also give us your feedback online using our survey, and we've had great engagement from the public, and you're welcome to share that link and also complete the survey yourself. Survey closes on Friday, May the 5th. So I'll pass over to my colleague Fiona for the next couple of slides.
Thank you. I just want to give you a quick overview of prohibited animal regulations. So the possession of animals in Canada is governed by all three levels of government. There are federal regulations, provincial, and municipal. The province of Ontario had enacted the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Act in 1997 to govern wildlife species that are native to Canada. The act makes it illegal to own local wildlife such as raccoons, wild turkeys, squirrels. However, there is no statute in Ontario which regulates non-native exotic ownership. People are able to import, export exotic species within the province. Chapter 349 of the Toronto Municipal Code outlines a list of animals that cannot be owned by the public to protect public safety, animal welfare, minimize nuisance, and health risks. The prohibited animal list includes such animals as tigers, kangaroos, non-human primates, elephants. It also includes some birds, flightless birds such as ostriches and emus, reptiles such as alligators and crocodiles, snakes that reach an adult length larger than 3 meters, and lizards which reach an adult length of larger than 2 meters, and all venomous and poisonous animals. The City of Toronto has provided exemptions in Chapter 349, Section 4, for organizations to keep prohibited animals. Some of these organizations include the premises of the City of Toronto Animal Shelter, an accredited veterinary hospital under the care of a licensed veterinarian, the Toronto Zoo, Riverdale Farm, Sunnybrook Stables, the Animal Paddocks on Deer Pen Road in High Park, Ripley's Aquarium, and Woodbine Racetrack. Those are just a few. It also includes the exemptions for the purpose in which professional films are being made and for educational programs conducted with prohibited animals. The objective of this review is to develop the creation of criteria to help to determine how prohibited animal lists are managed and how animals are either going to be added or removed from a list. Criteria may include public health and safety concerns, suitability of an animal as a pet, the animal does not present an invasive threat, and the animal does not present a public nuisance risk. Another objective of the review is the regulation of companies that use prohibited animals for educational programs at special events with minimum requirements. So, for example, we're looking at including perhaps health and safety training of staff, liability insurance, some sort of animal escape and recovery plan.
Okay. Thank you, Fiona. So just couple quick things. If you haven't had a chance to grab the PowerPoint in the back, that you can grab your own copy of the PowerPoint. Also, if you kindly sign in and provide us your email, we can keep you updated of the process. And there's also, should be in the back, a list of prohibited animals. For anybody who's participating online, you can find that list at Municipal License Standards website. And I guess the other thing I should also mention is that whatever recommendations staff present to City Council will consider those recommendations and can decide to proceed with them or not. Currently, as of July 1st, the exemption for education programs to use prohibited animals will no longer continue. So right now we were looking to see feedback from the public on the extent of the education programs and their use of prohibited animals. If we were to allow them to continue, by which regulations should we allow them to continue? If we don't allow them to continue, and other considerations around the prohibited animals list and how we add or remove animals. So that's enough talking from our end. We are now moving towards the question and answer and feedback session. So I think I would like like to get a sense from the room? Do you want to have it as a town hall? Do you want to have group discussions? Is there any strong preference?
Town hall.
Town hall. All right, town hall it is. By overwhelming consensus. So, in terms of town hall, the questions are on slide 11. They're up here. I'll just go through the questions. I'll go through the questions, and you can choose to answer any of these 3 questions, or provide general commentary on other questions that you have, or other feedback that you have to give. The first question is, are there criteria the city should consider when managing the prohibited animals list? As an example, public health and safety, animal welfare needs can be met, animal does not present an invasive threat, animal does not present a public nuisance risk. Second question is, do you think the City of Toronto should add or remove any animals on the prohibited animals list, which is provided in the back if you don't have a copy of it? And should the city permit companies to use prohibited animals for public or private events? If so, for what purposes? What kind of regulations should the city impose? And should there be conditions on the types of animals? So you're welcome to answer any of these 3 questions and or ask us any general questions around the process or the review. And I think we're going to open the floor up to any questions or feedback on these 3. And one thing I should note is I'm going to try and get as many voices as possible in. So if you speak, I'll try and see. If you'd like to speak again, I'll try and see if somebody who hasn't spoken will have a chance first. So I see the first hand.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mohammed. My name is Erica Ritter. I'm just an interested citizen who is concerned about animal issues. I would like to speak just to numbers 1 and 3.
Sure.
First of all, it seems to me that the criteria that should be considered that aren't mentioned there have to do with the well-being and welfare of the animal itself. These are all kind of human-centric reasons for, health concerns. I mean, all legitimate enough, invasive threat, etc., public nuisance. But in actual fact, what we should also be looking at in the year 2017 is whether or not it's in the animal's interest to be a wild animal, essentially, in a kind of captivity. I'm not speaking about the Toronto Zoo because I think that's a whole other question and issue. But this is about, the roadside mobile zoo or private ownership of animals that really don't belong in people's basements and ventilation systems. My second response, and I'm going to keep this very brief because I'm sure many other people want to speak, but I do not think the city should permit any companies who come under the category of private interests using prohibited animals for public or private events under especially the banner of education. Education is used to mask and excuse a whole bunch of things. I saw a piece today from CBC News in Sudbury about an exotic mobile animal outfit at Cambrian College, and the headline was "Stress Buster." So patting a capybara, having a kinkajou spruce on your shoulder, these all de-stress students. This is great for students, though I can't imagine why it would distress them, but even if it did, what about the stress on these animals? I think there should be complete conditions. I think accredited zoos, like the Toronto Zoo, who do have an educational function and know how to handle and deal with these animals in captivity. I personally don't believe any animal should be in captivity, but that's not going to happen. So if it is going to happen, I think it should happen under regulated and educated circumstances, not somebody dragging a bunch of animals around. I had the unfortunate pleasure of going to an exotic animal auction, an illegal exotic animal auction, where I saw wallabies, kangaroos, you name it, all kinds of macaques and different other primates, dragged out, paraded, made fun of, and auctioned off mostly to roadside zoos that had come in from other provinces. And in the end, it was possible to get the township in which this occurred to enact their bylaw, which shut this down. Now, I'm sure these people just moved on someplace else, but nevertheless, at least it was taking proactive action, and it was for the sake of the animals. And that's, those are my only points.
Thank you. So I have a question over here and then a question over there.
I just want to make a quick point. I didn't know which part of this was really going to catch on my sweater first. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. The real issue here is the welfare of the animals. And if that were put first and foremost, we wouldn't even be talking today because these businesses would not be in business. don't see educators lined up to say these are important things to do, or scientists, because this isn't real education, this isn't real science. This is hucksterism, and it's the exploitation of animals. But I want to catch you on one thing. I think this is an important point. In your presentation here, it says the province of Ontario enacted the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Act to govern wildlife species that are native to Canada. And I'm sorry, I got to point out to you that's not accurate. In fact, it's not close. And there's an important point. I'll be really brief as I can be. You know, there's a real problem with the ministry may tell you they focus on species that are native to Ontario, not Canada, they say. But there's nothing in that act that says it can't be used as the instrument for creating a list of prohibited species for the province. Nothing there. Word search for native or exotic, any of those things. The way they do it is they say you can't own animals that are on schedule, whatever the wording is, schedule A or B. And then they list these animals which you refer to here. But there's been at least one attempt in the provincial legislature to add another schedule of animals, and it would be some of these exotic animals that we're talking about, and it would simply work because that's how the act actually is structured. It's not in the body of the act structured to deal only with domestic species. The last thing I'll say about this is that the last province to enact a provincial law that had a provincial list of prohibited species was BC. And they did exactly that. They took their existing equivalent of the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Act and they put in a new regulation that had the provincial or prohibited list. So I leave you with that. Please get the information right. That's important because a lot of what we're doing here is pee into the wind, folks. The real pressure should be on the province to pull up their socks, and it's embarrassing that we're the only province without a law like this, and this is the instrument that would do it. They don't even have to have a new law. All they have to have is a new schedule attached to this existing legislation.
Thank you for the clarification. So I have a question over here and a question over there.
Sure, so I think we've already hit on what I do agree is the root to all of our problems, which is the lack of provincial legislation. And this is especially frustrating for someone who does use animals in educational programs in what I would consider to be an extremely professional manner, because I think at our last meeting they had, 70 people identified who bring out animals for educational programs, or at least so-called educational programs. But that includes literally the Toronto Zoo and backyard tiger breeders and macaque breeders, whatever. And obviously there are very, very great differences in veterinary standards, animal care, animal welfare considerations, all of the things that the city should be interested in. The previous exemption that we've had in Toronto is actually very similar to what they enacted in British Columbia. One of the requirements is that you have to be accredited by the National Zoological Association. That was taken out for reasons that I understand, and I don't think that alone is sufficient, but that would be obviously an integral part to whatever other lists of requirements we come up with. But I wholeheartedly agree that this is a very, very minor battle compared to eventually getting some kind of provincial legislation.
Hi, my name's Carly Ferguson. I'm with Ontario Captive Animal Watch. So for those that weren't here yesterday or last meeting, my background comes from a little bit of animal enforcement. So I can tell you, and I'm sure almost all bylaw officers, animal control officers would agree with me, that the positive list here that we were talking about seems to be the right approach in my mind. When you have a list of that stems so long of prohibited animals, I think it's much easier from an enforcement level, from the city's perspective as far as costs are concerned, to keep the list, reverse it, and keep it, these are the animals that are allowed in this city, end of story. I think that would be so much easier for everybody. Secondly, I'd like to say that I think the City of Toronto, I think this is a huge step because it would set an enormous precedent for all of Canada if this were to go through, and I think the positive list is the way to go.
Does anybody have two up here? Anyone else? We'll start with you.
So hi, my name is Lynn Kavanaugh. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this issue. I'm with World Animal Protection. We're a global organization with an office here in Toronto and over 11,000 supporters in Toronto alone. This is an important issue for our organization. Keeping animals in the wild is there's a growing concern because of the growing exotic pet trade and the harm it causes to animals. We agree. We think that the suggestion that Carly made around keeping a positive list is really the way to go. It's a progressive way. If we have a solid list of what animals are permitted, it leaves the burden of proof on the industry to make a case for keeping an animal should that be the case. And our position is that we support the Toronto City Council's stopping to allow the exemptions that's coming into force on July 1st. And there's a few reasons, some of which have already been spoken about here by other speakers. The animal suffering is key. We know that it's very stressful for wild animals to be handled on a regular basis when they're being traveled around in these mobile entertainment situations. And we question the educational value too. I mean, wild animals should be kept in the wild. Showing them in an unnatural setting does not do anything for education. It just teaches children and others that animals are commodities to be traipsed around at their will, at the people's will, for their own reasons and purposes. And then, of course, public health and safety. Despite the fact that we're an animal welfare organization, we still want to mention that there is a concern around public health and safety about keeping certain animals or allowing certain animals to interact with the public and with people. And we've seen countless situations where things have gone awry, such as the boys that were strangled by the snakes in New Brunswick in 2013, the situation that Erica mentioned, at the auction, where animals were treated very poorly. There was a situation today in the news with the tarantula, where a child's eye was harmed. So public health and safety certainly is an issue. So we really just feel like the spirit of the bylaw is to protect animals. Allowing people to travel around and showcase exotic animals really contradicts the good intention of the law, and it misleads the public about what wild animals are, and they should really be viewed as having value and intrinsic value for their own sake and respected as beings unto themselves.
Thank you. So a hand over here and a hand back there.
Yeah, I'm Jenny McQueen. I'm with Animal Rights Toronto, and I've also volunteered with Zucha and with Peter. And I thank the City Council for allowing this consultation. I think it's essential. I don't think we can rely on zoo associations to have regulations. We've seen what happens with places like Marineland. So I think it's entirely wrong to be teaching kids that it's okay to take animals out of their natural environment and to use them solely for entertainment. I've seen the animals, what they endure. They come along a lot of times in plastic tubs. So the traveling conditions are completely abysmal, and they have a completely unsuitable storage when they're not on show. You know, is the space adequate? Is the heat adequate? Are they stressed? Are they getting proper veterinary care? I very much doubt it. The natural habitats of the animals are no doubt being decimated in the countries that they actually should be living in. And is education being properly done with these travelling shows to actually address that? I very much doubt it. It's all titillation for the amusement and financial gain of the companies that are actually taking these animals to shows. Even though I'm animal rights, I'm also aware that it is a health risk. So salmonella is an issue with scaled animals, and it can be transmitted to kids. These travelling shows have no consideration of that. They will allow children to handle these animals. The animals themselves can be coming down with stress problems, stress diseases, as well as the children. So I'm completely against travelling zoos. Another point I'd like to make is in the summer, we've seen kangaroos languishing in hot areas, tiny little cages. These animals are just treated abysmally. It's just an absolute disgrace to Ontario. So thank you, Toronto City Council, for doing something about it.
Thanks for your feedback. Hand in the back.
My name is Nathaniel. I've been keeping reptiles and endangered species for about 8 to 9 years now. I want to talk about, because I feel this is very broad. You guys say that it says snakes on the list. There's a lot of snakes that are captive bred and not endangered. People are just talking about importations when importations are cited by CITES permits. You have to go with certain paperwork to actually import animals. You can't just apply and do it. It takes like close to a year, sometimes 2 years. So with that being said, there's also, with certain species, they say carry salmonella and can have reverse like health effects on people. Basically, if you treat the animal right and you care for it, nothing can happen. These people that are doing this, they have no respect for the animal. So basically, I feel like the city of Toronto has to maybe up their upkeep with checking in for zoos or roadside zoos, maybe setting out more regulations instead of banning animals. Because again, it's not the animals that are doing anything wrong, it's the people who are keeping them. Just like with the pit bulls, that has been a big controversial thing throughout the city of Toronto.
Thank you. And over here, and then over there.
Hi, my name is Dora Attard, and I'm the Director of Education with Ontario Captive Animal Watch. But I'm here first and foremost as a teacher and a mother of 2 daughters. So I just wanted to give my input on it. So teaching in 2007, I had a live animal program come to the school, and they brought various animals, including chinchillas and geckos, hamsters and guinea pigs, and a chicken. And the children all were under the age of 4, and were all allowed to touch and hold the animals, pass them around. And this really was, before joining OCA, really opened my eyes to how these mobile animal services are run. Even just being in the classroom with my students, could see, there were containers were opened up and the animals were sleeping. They have a lack of privacy, were woken up out of their sleep. A lot of them were nocturnal, and were just passed around and handed around. And then I had asked if we wanted to get a class pet, and I had asked what would be the best one, and they had suggested a hamster would be good. And at the time, I knew that hamsters were nocturnal, but they didn't mention that during class time, the kids would want to obviously see the hamster and play with it and all that. So we would wake up the hamster, I would say, 2 to 5 times a day. And I mean, it definitely didn't live as long as it probably should have. It was under a year that it had passed away. And I think I had brought it to the vet, and they had said, I mean, disturbing their sleep stresses them out, and stressing it out by passing it around the classroom, and it was exposed to, we would let it run and around in the classroom. It was exposed to everything that the children would touch. So that definitely lessened their life. And then I wanted to say, working with Ontario Captive Animal Watch, I go into classrooms in the TDSB as well as private schools where I teach and talk to children about animals in their natural habitat versus in captivity, and compare their behavior, their lifespans, their environment, their everything. And they didn't need to see these animals to learn about them. I had talked about my trip. I went to Tanzania in East Africa a few years ago, and I had spoken about a hedgehog that I had seen. I was out cooking dinner with the family out in the yard, and I had seen a wild hedgehog, and I had never seen one. And I'd seen them obviously at pet stores, but in the wild, and it was just there, and it was just moving along. I think they're blind as anything, because they didn't see when I put my hand in front. But it was just really cool. It was cool to see it, and I brought that experience to the children in the classroom, and also all my pictures and videos from the safari with all the wild animals. And at that point as well, it clicked in my head that I will never see another animal in captivity, just because I had seen them where they are and how they behave, and that's not at all how they behave in captivity or in cages or whatever. Just wanted to say also that I think with these programs, children are taught that these animals are meant for human use and for their entertainment, and their future treatment of and their relationship with these animals change. They see them, instead of feeling the need to protect them and defend them, they see them as personal personal accessories that they can bring them around and carry them around with them and have no respect and no idea of how they had lived previously in the wild or how they were brought to their tank or to their cage. We had already spoke about the risks of diseases, but I just wanted to say when we treat the animals who share the world with us, what do we, as commodities, what are we teaching the children? I think we're teaching them that they can be exploited and that we're condemning even more wild species to extinction. I think we all have a responsibility to keep wild animals wild, and by passing on this knowledge to the children, they can help them and model or give them an example of someday lead them to the end of exotic pet trade. So I feel as a teacher, it's my duty and a mother, and my duty to share the truth and knowledge with my students and my children.
Thank you. So I have two hands, but these two people have already spoken, so anybody who's yet to speak before I get to them on any of the three questions that are listed up here, or any general questions you may have about prohibited animals. Okay, so
Maybe just a clarifying question actually for
Sure.
you folks. So the list already exists, right? And now you're consulting whether there's an appetite to add or remove animals from the list. Is there some kind of like a policy problem that's driving these consultations? Like, what gave rise to the consultation? Why are we looking to add or remove animals from the list? I'm just curious.
Yeah, sure. So this was a direction that we got from City Council to look at, in particular, adding flamingos and kangaroos and snakes to the list. And it came from a councillor who had seen these animals and wanted us to take a look at that. So we have direction from City Council to look at that. So we thought, if we're looking at the list, we should look at what would be the criteria to add animals or remove them from that list. And that's the second part of the work that we're doing is on the educational programming exemption. So that also was a decision from the council to say, as of July 1st, we want to delete that from the bylaw. But before we do that, we want city staff to go and consult to understand, how are they used, how many people are doing it, and potentially come back with regulations for those types of companies. So
And is the city testing any sorts of assumptions in terms of what an educational program would look like? Do you have a preconceived notion of what an education program would look like, or are you just testing examples here?
I don't think any decisions have been made, and part of what we want to hear from people today is how are these animals being used, and in what context, and what is an educational program, what's the threshold for that? So I think that's helpful.
and we're also speaking to stakeholders as well, provide similar details on what education program could look like as well.
But there's no decisions have been made. We really want to hear from people, and then we'll write recommendations that will go to City Council. They'll go to licensing and standards first in June, and then City Council will then make the final decision. But at the licensing and standards committee, that's when you'll see staff's recommendations, and then you'll have another chance to go talk to the politicians directly about what you think.
And it's going to the licensing committee because presumably some sort of licensing model is being envisioned.
No, it's going there because we oversee chapter 349, which is the animals chapter. So it's not necessarily that we're going to propose licensing.
It's a committee that we report to.
Yeah.
So I see a new hand, and then I have two people who've already spoken, and a new person as well. So you, and then we'll be right after.
I just wanted to know why kangaroos, flamingos, and snakes? That seems very arbitrary as to why snakes and why all snakes? Why those categories?
I believe what happened is that the counselor saw a flamingo and a kangaroo in her ward and wanted to hear more about that. And then the snakes was coming from the New Brunswick case.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
the New Brunswick case was regarding a giant snake, I believe, not all snakes, and that giant snake, if I'm not mistaken, is already banned in the GTA. So that's why it just kind of seems unusual that snakes in general, it sounds like there's a blanket that they want to ban. I don't know, that's sort of what I gathered from
prime examples right now, certain pythons. Some people are saying that yes, they should be prohibited. Some people are saying that some subspecies of them should be out and out banned, right? So we're looking for your input as to what you think.
So I had a hand back here.
I'm just curious, who are the stakeholders? Maybe names?
They are business owners who have prohibited animals, animal welfare groups, veterinarian clinics, city agencies that maintain and keep prohibited animals like the Toronto Zoo, Hyde Park Zoo, and then the general public.
Who are the first couple that you mentioned?
So, businesses that have prohibited animals.
That have?
That have prohibited animals. So companies that do the educational programming is a stakeholder that we've been instructed to go and consult.
They have prohibited animals.
Correct. So I had a new hand. Sorry, I had this gentleman.
That's
You
okay.
already spoke. So
I have
this
a
gentleman.
question, but not a comment.
No problem. Anyone new before I get to this gentleman over here? Okay, so yeah, you're up.
Yeah, first of all, just one thing to clarify, because a few of you said, good on Toronto Zoo passing this motion. However, the motion that they passed only removes the exemption for the accredited institutions. As we've said before, there are something like 70 odd people that bring around animals, and there's only about 5 of them, including the Toronto Zoo, that do programs, and I'm worried that, just a little worried that we're painting with a little bit too broad a brush on some of these issues. All of the concerns you guys mentioned, like wrong messaging, giving people the idea that wild animals shouldn't be kept in the wild. Of course they should. Any educational program worth its salt, that should be a central part of their messaging. But there are a small minority of institutions like the Toronto Zoo, Earth Rangers, and so on, who do these programs very much in the right way. Just to give you an idea, you asked what a stakeholder is. I'm one of the directors of outreach for Little Rays Nature Centers, which operates in Halifax, Ottawa. We have one in Hamilton as well. We are the largest outreach program in Canada. We reach somewhere between 0.8 to 1.2 million people participate in our programs. The bulk of the animals we bring for education are reptiles, for instance. We've already mentioned, which comes up in every meeting, for instance, salmonella with reptiles. We've been operating about 22 years, not a single case of salmonella. That is a reportable disease, by the way. There are, of course, people who literally have reptiles in their basement, who have no veterinary oversight, no infection control plan. They have no idea what the stress of an animal looks like, no consideration for any of these things. That is terrifying to me, that they have these animals and they bring them out to people. And there are people like Toronto Zoo, Earth Rangers, and so on, professional zoologists, who do a very good job of having high standards. But again, that is, of course, a tiny, tiny minority. The vast majority of those, 70 people that were mentioned in the previous meeting were, of course, not accredited, not professional scientific institutions. And just one, oh sorry, do you want to interject? Little Rays Nature Centers. Little Rays Nature Centers.
Little Rays Nature Centers.
Yes.
From?
Well, we were in Ottawa, Hamilton, with Halifax, Newfoundland. We do programming in the States, but we don't have any actual nature centers in the States as well.
So where's your home base?
Ottawa and Hamilton are our primary ones. Little Rays Nature Centers.
Is that like Ray apostrophe S?
Yes.
Like
The name Ray.
Little Rays
It's named after the founder's father. It's a very quirky name. But just one last thing I want to end on. I know I already said this about 2 meetings ago, but I know it comes up every once in a while. The survey that was put out and some of the language that is always used is always very misleading. For instance, I mentioned this before, it's a good example. One of the questions of the list of possible animals that people could check off, do you think these should be banned? One of them is constricting snakes. And I know I said this example, so a couple of you guys have already heard it, but just for lots of the new people here and the people on Facebook, if you walked into City Council or a room of the general public and you told people, guys, people are keeping constricting snakes as pets, people are bringing constricting snakes into classrooms, people would, some significant portion, or at least of the people, would gasp and say, oh my God, that's horrible, we need to stop this right away. But, as anyone with even a tiny bit of knowledge knows, constricting snakes include very harmless animals, ranging all the way up to animals that no one without a lot of expertise should go anywhere near. It's a lot like saying, do you think felines should be banned because we've seen some issues with lions? You're going to end up accidentally banning house cats, which obviously don't have the same safety concerns as leopards and lions and all of that. So these are areas where we have to be, I think, very, very careful with language, because you're going to get a high amount of people checking off, yes, ban constricting snakes, because they're working with lots of misconceptions.
Thank you. So I had a hand over here, and then two hands over here, and over there, and John back. Go ahead.
Very quickly, please don't take it personally that I called you on the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Act info.
Correction was welcome.
I've heard ministers and deputy ministers rattle that off inaccurately. It's a myth. But you guys should help bust
From their
that
website,
myth.
but I'll correct
Help bust that myth. And aside from the fact that I think that any reasonable erring on the side of public health, public safety, kids' health, kids' safety should make this a no-brainer. We shouldn't even be talking about this. Back to the welfare of the animals. And I want to point out two very quick things based on a couple of things that were said over at this table about the transport of animals and how they're exhibited, etc. And I think this is really important to note, especially when we hold up the gold standard of the Toronto Zoo and some of these other facilities that are worth pointing out. The Provincial Animal Protection Law in this province, the OSPCA Act, has special protection provisions for animals that are kept for exhibit, entertainment, and a few other purposes. And that catches zoos. And it enables the OSPCA to inspect without a warrant these places where animals are kept for these purposes. But the key is they have premises. And a lot of the businesses that you folks are talking about don't have premises that are open to the public. And that makes it either difficult or sometimes impossible for them to be inspected and inspected properly. So you've got the gold standard. You've got these premises that can be inspected. I know the zoo is in fact technically a research facility and isn't inspected by the OSPCA. The point is that there is an authority in place that enables someone to go in there and inspect to make sure the animals are properly cared for. The vast majority, I like Little Rays, the vast majority of the businesses that want to do this activity are what are considered mobile zoos or basement zoos or these other places. There's no reason to open the door for these places because not only are they notorious for not treating their animals properly, they've slipped through a loophole and they're very hard for the proper authorities to inspect. So please don't make it easier for them. And last but not least, and this is particular to the City of Toronto, unfortunately, even though I think the provincial law is good, that it recognizes that those animals need special protection. Folks, we live in the biggest city in North America that doesn't have locally provided animal protection. Did you know that? Did you know that? The OSPCA doesn't have a physical presence in the City of Toronto. So we have this great law that protects all animals, and it does really good job on animals that are kept for these entertainment exhibit purposes, etc., enabling inspections without a warrant. But in this city, the sole entity that is authorized to enforce that law, they don't operate here. So again, we've got a great law, nobody enforcing it. Please don't open the door to these businesses that are notorious for mistreating their animals in the city, where even the law that's there to protect those animals isn't being actively enforced.
So before I get to a couple of hands of people who've already spoken, anyone who has yet to speak that would like a chance to speak? No? Okay, so lady up here and lady up here.
I kind of take issue with, I guess Little Rays consider themselves, one of the better organizations, but I take issue with the name, like Nature Center. Taking animals from a natural environment and existing solely an environment where they should reside. So you're housing animals in a very unnatural environment within a building. These animals should be in the wild, enjoying life as it should be. And saying that you're educating children is a bit of an oxymoron. I think it's a very bad education. And I think you're hiding behind the fact that you're a big company. How many of your companies are franchised?
I asked no back and forth, so you can sort of try and ask the questions and or comment on what somebody had already said, but try and avoid the back and forth. Kristen?
Yeah. So I also just wanted to respond to the comment here and then get back to my question. So in terms of the accredited facilities, that I think we're here today to talk about the non-accredited facilities and those that have fallen through the loophole, the mobile entertainment situations. So I would think that those that are already accredited would support this bylaw that the city is putting through because it just makes their organizations more valid. So they don't want their reputations to be tarnished by all these roadside type situations or mobile. So I feel like it doesn't really need to to be stated, in fact, that they should be on side with the people that are speaking out for animal welfare and public health reasons based on the arguments that we've put forward already. And the other thing I just want to stress is the point that this fellow also raised was around the different, say if we were to use the example of a snake, constricting snakes, and some are more dangerous than others. The fact remains is when we get back to the animal as the front and center of the story, is that regardless of the danger that the animal poses, those animals can still suffer in captivity or in poor conditions. And so it's not, if we just talk about health and safety, then it's a human-centric argument. And I think first and foremost, we need to think about the animal here. It's 2017, we're a progressive society, and it's the animals suffer very much in these sort of captive, inappropriate situations. So I just wanted to emphasize that again, because I felt like we were getting off track, or that point was getting a little bit lost. My questions were around, first, there's the list. So what's up for consultation is exemptions, but not adding any animals to the list. Is that correct?
So adding, removing, and the criteria is up.
And the
for-
criteria.
up for
So it's not
consultation.
just about the exemption for the traveling entertainment.
It's a
Okay.
separate question.
And so that is, okay, so then I would just like to reiterate the point around having the positive list of what animals could be kept, because I think that would be a better way to go. And just for information, the Netherlands actually, I think just a couple months ago passed, they had a ban on exotic animals, and what they did is just put forward a positive list as an approach, because it just made it more solid and a stronger way, and in a clearer way to send the message about what's permitted and everything else isn't, unless it's on this list. And I think, yeah, that was my only question. Yeah, that was my question. Thank you.
Gentleman in the back.
So, kind of expanding on that gentleman's topic over there, the snakes that did cause harm and kind of elevated this conversation, that never really happened here, and they were already banned. Carpet pythons, ball pythons, boa constrictors, you don't hear anything about them happening on the news. When's the last time a ball python hurt somebody? Never happened. So, like, what I want to say is, again, research. Not everyone knows what these animals really need. Again, I've been doing this 8 years. I talked to some people at the zoo. They didn't know what one of my species of snake was, and it's critically endangered. So, at the end of the day, the gold seal isn't really gold.
I'm over here, and then I have you here.
Hi, so I just wanted to give an experience I had last time we met. I gave an experience, and then another one came to me today of a situation. So there is a place in Ontario that isn't necessarily a mobile zoo, although they do transport their animals, but it's essentially a standard in place area. There was some disabled children, and they were passing around some reptiles, some spiders. In particular, this was a tarantula, and the disabled child was holding the tarantula and crushed it in his hands. And in a situation like that, it's highly uncontrollable. So, I've witnessed many things given what we do, very many stereotypical behaviors in these animals. And I'd have to agree with Lynn that bringing it back to the welfare issue, and I do know that the City of Toronto, takes that, I think, above all considerations here. And I think we need to bring it back to that issue. And as far as accreditation is concerned with these facilities, I'd just like to remind everybody that if it is a CASA accreditation we're talking about here, CASA is funded by the very people that they accredit. There's no transparency whatsoever. It's a club of people that get together and make money off of the people they accredit. And I would also state that their standards are quite substandard. As well are our provincial legislations, which we work with all of the time, trying to improve those, and our federal laws as well. So I think this is a very big step in the right direction. And if we have to start at the municipal level to do it, again, talking about the positive list, I think from a bylaw level, from the city level, from the public level, I think it's the easiest way to go, it's the cheapest way to go, and it's the best thing
for animal welfare, to do it that way. And
Thank you. So, got a hand in the back.
I was just wondering, why don't they just eliminate them? Never mind criteria and animals with no yes, like just wipe it out to be fair to animals, because it's not fair. The animals are not happy. Like, forget all nitpicking, like the animals need to be free, they were born to be free, they should be free. So this is a bunch of, I don't know, I just think the main thing is the animals' welfare. Forget people and blah, blah, blah. The animals, they want to be free. They're born free. They're meant to be free. Like, humans have no right to be doing what they're doing to animals. I went to a creature conference in London, England this summer, and they're trying to get the churches more involved because somebody has to look out for the animals. Globally, they're being treated horrendously, horrifically. So I'm supposed to go to churches and get them to get more active, but this is really weird that this happened. But our government, like, come on, Canada, why can't we be compassionate to animals, slaughtering the seals and all this about prohibited and exotic animals? They shouldn't even be in the picture. It should not be an option. Don't make it better, worse, rules, this, that, and no, none of it. You can have a dog, you can have a cat, a horse. Like, really, bottom line, this is all going in circles and people and their money and their businesses, but that's BS. The animals are wild and they're born to be free like we are, and they have the right to be free. I wish Rob Laidlaw was here, because I learned a lot from him. There's 4 basic things with animals, and one of the big one is freedom. Freedom to live where they want in nature with their other animals, eat what they want when they want. That's the bottom line. This makes me so angry.
So Rob was at our last
And people are
consultation.
greedy. They don't care about the animals. It's all money. It's all BS. We know that. We know that. You know, and the States is horrific. They're coming across these people. The animals are so terrible shape there. But I don't want Canada to be like that. And we're mean to animals. We're not compassionate Canada. The seal slaughters, fur coats, like, I'm really passionate about this, and it's in the Bible. We're supposed to look after the animals. They're God's creatures. If anybody believes in God or whatever, or their creator, they are meant to be here to look at. We're supposed to look after them, respect them. They have a right to life and freedom. Like, how would you like to be living like them? Put yourself in their shoes. Do unto others as you'll have them do it to you. Do you want to be locked up and handed around? No. It's so basic. To me, it's so simple.
Thank you. So
Compassion.
I have a new hand over here, and then
So just like a side point on what you're saying, I think we definitely need to make a distinction in this conversation between wild-caught animals and captive-bred animals. Captive-bred animals, I'm sure we have all kinds of disagreements in this room as to whether or not we should be breeding exotics in captivity, such as ball pythons or flamingos or anything of that nature. But that, I think, is a different discussion. Right now we're talking about if it was bred in captivity, could we have it in the city limits? As opposed to wild-caught animals, I know there's a lot of very strong feelings in this room about how they should stay wild, and I agree. But we aren't really talking about here whether or not we should be taking things out of the wild and bring them in, so much as most of these animals on this list are all captive bred. Things like kangaroos haven't been exported from Australia in a very long time. Sorry, my voice cracks when I talk to people. And so these are all animals born in Ontario. They were born here. They can't go back into the wild. There's nowhere for them to go. So I think that's just a little bit of a distinction we should have while having this conversation, is if we're talking captive bred animals, what we should be doing.
We should be captive breeding them.
thank you. So I have a hand over here, and then one over here, and then one there. So go ahead.
Yeah, so maybe just, this is another point I wanted to make, but maybe just to kind of work off of this discussion. I mean, you have captive bred animals, you have wild-caught animals, and you have rescued animals, you know, and I think depending on your values, you might, you know, have a different appreciation as to which ones could benefit from that life in captivity if it's a rescued animal. You know, a point was made earlier that all animals should be released into the wild so they can, you know, live long and healthy lives, but that is just not the reality. If you take a wild, you know, a rescued animal that had been in captivity for a long time and you release it, you take a captive bred animal and you release it, those animals will be worse off than if you just maintain them in the environment.
They successfully release dolphins and whales. It can happen. It
I think that's,
Okay, sorry.
yeah, that science I think is pretty contested, but the point that I wanted to make was with respect to the third point there, the idea of prohibiting, you just kind of blocking the thing, private companies, that was the term I wanted to touch on. So I'm not sure why you're necessarily focusing on companies. You could have, a company like Ray's, that has a complement of, 50 animals, and you could have a private collector with 30 cats in a barn, So I think whether you're the Toronto Zoo, Little Ray's, or you're a traveling road exhibit, or just an individual collector, I think the same rules should apply to you. So you should demonstrate on the one hand that you're capable of looking after these animals. On the other hand, you should demonstrate the ability to, maintain some sort of level of public health and safety. So, I don't really know that the entity is really what matters. I think what matters is the set of criteria that you bring to the table as an owner of those animals. And I agree that, frankly, from my personal perspective, as a human being in society, I don't think that animals should be kept in captivity for the entertainment of others. Although I do appreciate that there are circumstances under which, those animals might actually benefit from that life in captivity as opposed to the alternative. So I think given that the point had been made earlier, if we really truly cared about the welfare of animals, we wouldn't be having these conversations, but we're having conversations about which animals to add to the list, how do we define education? Because I think there's a big enough portion of society that's comfortable with keeping these animals in captivity, and as City Hall or City Council, you're going to take the public kind of view and the overall the public perception or whatever kind of galvanizes the majority of the folks, and you're going to try to improve that in some way. And so you're looking to improve, what animals are added. You're looking to better define what is perhaps a dangerous animal. And I think in that context, in that world, we should be looking at what makes for a good caretaker of the animals, both from the perspective of ensuring public safety and maintaining the welfare of the animals that those people keep in captivity.
That's great points. So I have a hand over here. I'll get to Andrew as well, and then a hand over here.
Yeah, I have like a good 100 things I want to say. I've got about half of them by now. But yeah, so just to give you a little perspective, just on, for instance, I don't want to focus entirely on just reiterate about my organization, but in my organization we don't use any wild animals for programming. Something about, given the year, between 80 to 95% of the animals we get are actually ex-pets. We're partners with the SPCA for the both intake and rehoming of exotic animals that they've seized. So about half the animals that we take in that are rescues are voluntary surrenders. The other half are actually seizures. In a given year, we can take in something between 400 to 800 animals. The vast majority of these are not appropriate to be used for educational programs, but once in a while you do get a well-socialized animal that is. And it's not entirely always with everyone about greed. Like the Toronto Zoo is a non-profit organization. In the past 12 months, we have relocated 54 of Canada's largest crocodilians that used to be pets, and it cost us $30,000 to send them to sanctuaries around the world. That's money we didn't have to spend. It is money that is funded primarily through the educational programs that we do offer to everything from schools, our presentations at the CNE, and everything else that we do. And I do find it a little bit strange when there's a stakeholder meeting and there's an animal welfare group meeting or an animal advocate meeting. I consider myself as much an animal advocate as anyone else in the room, and a primary messaging in all of our presentations is surrounded on two things. One is responsible pet ownership. What makes an appropriate pet? What doesn't make an appropriate pet? I don't want to be wrangling crocodilians out of people's swimming pools 20 years from now because people import them from the US and buy them for $75 at an alligator farm in Florida and smuggle them up. And secondly, to keep animals wild. Don't take any animals wild. There's a very big distinction between the dog you have at home and the wolf or coyote you see outside. What is that distinction? Why is it okay to pat your dog but not okay to get close or pat the animal outside? And it is this kind of messaging that should be a major part of any organization purporting to be educational and worth its salt.
So I'm just a little bit confused. So just because an animal is, say, captive bred, or just because an animal, no matter what the species, is a rescue, that certainly does not make them domesticated. As we know, as science has demonstrated, domestic dogs, canines, it has taken thousands and thousands of years to domesticate a dog. So just because an animal is born in captivity certainly does not make it a domesticated animal, regardless of the species. So I just wanted to make that point very clear, and that has been scientifically demonstrated. So that's just not my opinion.
Thank you. So Andrew?
Yeah, hi. Some really great discussions here. I compliment everybody on the passion that they're bringing to this. I'm glad we've got this open forum where we can do this. A couple of things. We've talked about the welfare of the animals, and I wholeheartedly agree that that is a principal concern, and it's certainly the way I conduct myself professionally and privately. I too am a parent. I've got 2 kids, and I've certainly instilled that in them, that they respect wildlife and respect nature. And children have different ways of learning, certainly. But I have seen it personally in my own kids and in my nieces and nephews, that a connection with wildlife, a connection with nature, becomes much stronger when they actually get to, get their hands into a pond, pick up that turtle, pick up that snake, and actually, have a moment with it. And we can't really discount that. And there are a number of studies out there that certainly do show that. I've got a list of them here. Barreau 2013, Ballou 2012. Physical contact with animals appears to be a crucial element to improve children's attitudes towards an unpopular organism. That organism is snakes, and that's what I work with. So, those types of hands-on encounters really do help kids overcome misconceptions and really, really appreciate nature and become advocates for nature, which I think is really important. Regarding the stress in these animals, certainly some animals do not tame down. We're not, it's not going to be domestication certainly, but some animals do, as Del pointed out, do make suitable animals for handling because they are quite acclimated and quite used to it and accommodating to it. I did my PhD research looking at stress in snakes. And we can quantify what stress is, and we can look for the metabolites of stress in these animals. And long-term stress is certainly detrimental. Acute stress happens in every animal's life, whether it's in the wild or it's a deer downtown Toronto or a raccoon in your backyard. Stress happens to everybody and everything every day. It's just that long-term stress that causes immune suppression, etc. And in the work that I did, working with primarily rattlesnakes and working with researchers in Ontario and how they study these animals in order to help recover critically endangered populations, we didn't find evidence of long-term stress in the animals that we were looking at. So, stress is certainly there, but some animals overcome that. They become acclimated, become accustomed to it, and they can certainly deal with that. Some are more appropriate than others, but it does happen. And one last thing about keeping animals wild. I've been involved in breeding programs that reintroduce animals to basically recover threatened populations, not just here in Ontario but around the world. And Jane Goodall, everybody knows Jane Goodall, but just last October, she was talking about what zoos do and the place of animals in the wild or in zoos. And she recognized, paraphrasing, she said, the best zoos today have much larger enclosures, well-qualified staff, and great effort is put into enrichment activities, both mental and physical. And she was talking about chimpanzees, but she also says it applies to all animals in zoo settings, and the good zoos. And again, I certainly appreciate your recognition that, accredited zoos are different than the other ones that we're talking about. And, she really does end it by saying, and this is a direct quote, there's a mistaken belief that all animals in their natural habitat are, by definition, better off. Not true necessarily. And that really recognizes the fact that humans have impacted 83% of the land surface. Okay, there isn't much wild left. And it's a reality. It's certainly something that, I've dedicated my career to trying to reverse. But the reality is that we manage all the wildlife populations on this planet virtually. So when we're talking about an animal's place in the wild, yeah, that's great. But we don't have a lot of wild left, and certainly for animals like the gentleman said that have never known the wild, You put them out there, and survival is extremely limited, extremely poor for most of these animals. So I don't think that's a real option for a lot of the animals that are in the city right now.
Thank you, Anna. So anyone who has yet to speak that would like to speak, see a hand in the back.
Peter Kendall, I'm with Earth Rangers, and I just wanted to build on the comments from the Toronto Zoo there. We do live animal programs in schools right across Canada. We do about 1,000 schools a year, reach about 300,000 students. We do for our registered charities, so we do these all at no cost. The main message that we're trying to communicate to the kids is around biodiversity loss. The animals are in crisis, and we have a responsibility to help protect them. Through these programs, we have grown to be the largest youth-based conservation group probably in the world with 160,000 young members. These are 8 to 12-year-old kids. The kids have raised in the last 2 years about $3 million for conservation projects across the country. So these are things like working with Vancouver Aquarium to breed Oregon spotted frogs and build a new wetland in Vancouver Parks to reintroduce the frogs, or buying land in Norfolk County and rebuilding sandberms for American badgers. The kids also do what we call missions at home, and they do hundreds of thousands of these each year. And these are activities like building pollinator habitats, or doing energy or water conservation programs at home, or doing local shoreline cleanups. We spend a lot on third-party research of the efficacy of our programs, and what we've found in that, in these research programs, is that kids who participate in these kind of programs do have higher environmental knowledge, have higher reported environmental activities, and also show a much greater confidence in their ability to make a difference in the world. We also follow a lot of the peer-reviewed science that was talking about it as well. So there.
Thank you. So I have 3 hands. People have already spoken. A hand in this table, a hand over there. Anyone who's yet to have had a chance to say anything they would like to add, and or ask us any general questions? No. Oh, there you go.
So perhaps not a question. I really appreciate being here today and hearing everyone's opinions, values, etc. My name is Marie Elizabeth Gagnon, and I run the Parrot Sanctuary in downtown Toronto. I think what I would like to maybe just briefly contribute is that it is so important to understand animals, and that we can't necessarily recreate their needs in a captive environment. Every day I have the reminder of, as working with parrots, that exotic animals, it's very difficult to look after them in terms of as a companion, and especially what I see is animals or birds that do things such as self-mutilation. And I think when you see the fallout of animals, specifically parrots, as companions, it's devastating to see that certain species really demonstrate their level of stress by damaging themselves voluntarily. So it's not so much, I just want to put that out there, that I think a lot of times, if you look at behavioral science and studies, that a lot of people are very knowledgeable in how to care for animals, and other people are really not well educated enough to look after. I think it's important to have peer review and to look at all the facets of it. But as much as I adore looking after parrots on a daily basis, it is very devastating to see the lack of education for these companions. So I'm not advocating to not have parrots as companions or what have you. But I think the education is really fundamental. I personally do not bring animals out to groups. I like to receive more private, not events, but people to come and inform themselves before they have a companion. But because it is, to me, a studies of one, certain animals, whether domesticated or exotic, may be able to have experiences outside of their, because we can't recreate their habitat. But I think for many it is very stressful to travel, and I guess the overall not knowing, do you know your species, and do you know how it exhibits the stress that is involved? And it is not, you can love them to pieces in your mind, but how much is that animal getting from the relationship? I didn't come here with any formal sort of, but I just wanted to put that out there, that I think it is, I think if sometimes people were to see the outcome of animals who are non-domesticated or domesticated for that matter, I think any animal that you say is really easy to look after is probably not being cared for properly. And having children as well, and the level of empathy they've lived with parrots, with dogs, with all sorts of different creatures that we've had over the years as companions, I really see their level of empathy towards all forms of animals, whether it's wildlife, whether it's, in Canada or all around the world. But I don't necessarily, I just don't feel that there's enough. There's a lot of stuff on the internet, but there's not enough really concrete, peer-reviewed, important education that is out there for people that have animals as companions. And I feel like if you're going to have a companion animal, it has to be a two-way relationship. It's not what you're purely gaining, is really recognizing if you're doing your best by the animal.
Thank you. Is that a hand over here?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yes, I just wanted to, and I really appreciate it, what you said. I just wanted to address the issue of the captive bred versus wild caught. I think that that's really a slippery slope, and it's almost, again, to use the word loophole in this discussion. It probably is the case that most of these animals we're talking about now are captive bred, but the fact is they are still wild animals by nature and will suffer in the environments that we've been talking about, whether it's inappropriate handling or inappropriate housing or whatever. And there's another issue too related to that, is that allowing captive animals to be kept without any prohibitions really fuels the perception that it's okay to keep these animals, which then in turn fuels the wild caught market. And again, it's a commodification of animals. So, if the wild caught birds and reptiles are out there and we say, oh, they're captive bred, so it's okay because it's not harming wild populations, they're still, as I said, harming the individual animal that they might suffer, but also it fuels that market. And it gives the impression that it's keeping animals is okay. And I also wanted to mention the point about, I do recognize that someone said over here, and I thought that was a really good point, is the whole rescue rehabilitation side. It's true that it's an unfortunate consequence that because animals have been kept in inappropriate situations, that sometimes they can't be released, so sometimes there might be a rehab facility or a rescue facility, but really the real legitimate ones don't have that component where they're interacting with the public, and they're not a form of entertainment, but they're trying to provide the best situation for the animal given the circumstance. So I think that's a very different scenario.
Thank you. So I have three hands here, hand over here, hand over there. Anyone who's yet to have a chance to speak would like to say something? If not, I'll go over here and then I'll come back to this table.
Okay, I'd just like to remind everyone that, even though, Toronto Zoo was charged and convicted by the Canadian Wildlife Service for killing geese in an inhumane fashion. So, Toronto Zoo is certainly not the epitome of the perfect zoo, if one does exist, that's for sure. And you talked about Jane Goodall, and that's great, her opinion. But I was inspired by Diane Fossey, who from watching her National Geographic work, and there's never been a mountain gorilla in captivity, but I came to love mountain gorillas, and that's why I'm sitting here today. That's why I formed my organization. That's how I started. I've never seen one, but I did see it through her work in the wild. So getting back to this education issue is, I think very important, as well as the animal welfare issue. And I'd like to remind everybody, if we're talking about zoos, Marineland has been charged now. Bowmanville Zoo has been charged. We all saw what the owner of Bowmanville Zoo was doing to his animals. They were an accredited CASA facility, as well as Marineland, and I can tell you, I've been to both of those facilities numerous times, and some of the things I have seen would really shock all of you, I mean, including the Toronto Zoo. So, you know, I think once we bring it back to a welfare issue, and like I said, I do think that's the city's main concern here, and I think that's all of our concerns in this room. So I think we should bring it back to that issue.
Can I just make a clarification? I don't believe the Bowmanville Zoo or Marineland are CASA accredited.
Oh, yes, yes they are.
They're not.
Yeah, no, they're not.
If they're not now, they were definitely,
They were at some
they were
point.
previously. So
And-
just to clarify.
Well, no, I just wanted to.
I think that's a good point, though, that,
Sorry, I had her next.
Oh.
I can add you to speak about this. Okay, so after you.
I just want to touch on the captive versus wild caught and read something out that was produced for World Animal Protection, information pack called Scales and Tails. So reptile breeders often claim by producing animals in captivity there will be no need to take them from the wild. While there may be a grain of truth in that statement, in some circumstances, the overall effect of captive breeding in this regard has been rather minimal. Despite the purported advantages of captive bred reptiles, breeders often find it difficult to compete with imported wild-caught animals that can be procured at a much lower cost by wholesalers and retailers. So they also mention that these farms are, many of them located in the United States, Latin America and Africa. They have terrible conditions, and they will sometimes take pregnant animals from the wild to replenish their stock of young. And again, I just want to say that using animals, picking up animals, touching animals in such a ridiculous, entertaining way, I don't think is any way at all a good education tool. Laurie Morano is a respected animal behaviorist and urologist. Look up some of her writings on this.
You over, Mike?
Yeah, just a couple of quick points. But first, to the fellow from Toronto Zoo, I do want to take issue with one thing you said. And I know it's not supposed to be back and forth, but when you say that we can't discount the value of somebody having a touch-it-feel-it experience with a wild animal like that, I say to you, yes, we can. Actually, that's the point. We can discount that. All we have to do is say put the animal's welfare first, and then we've discounted it. Now, the next thing I wanted to say about the breeding in captivity is one of the things that it surely supports, promotes, and continues. And I don't think we touched on this exactly, really caught most of the, the downstream effects, is that it certainly supports the continued breeding of captive animals, allegedly to continue that business or to sell to other businesses. So we've got to stop those businesses from doing their business, and then we stop the breeding of the animals in captivity, and that's part of the larger point I wanted to make, which was around the issue of whether you can release these animals into captivity, or are they always better off in captivity if they've been. I get it, but the point is, if you have a strong law, and again I think it should come from the province, I think you guys are dealing with the province won't deal with it. If you have a strong law, you have a grandfathering clause. You recognize there are animals that they're going to be there when you have the ban, but sometime down the road, 1, 3, 5, 10 years, whatever it is, whatever the species you're dealing with, you've dealt with that, and you don't have to deal with that question anymore, because the ones that were born in captivity or were in captivity at the time of the ban, hopefully a ban that stays in place, they're in animal heaven, and we don't have to deal with it anymore. So there are ways to do it. Basically, folks, I don't know whether Marineland lost their CASA accreditation or not. The point is that for most of their existence as a place where animals were not well treated, they had CASA accreditation. You can't pin your hopes on CASA accreditation. It means nothing. I think the City of Toronto's approach, which was in fact to get rid of the CASA reference in the exemption, was a really, really good one, and to only list the facilities that met a very, very high standard of, amongst other things, animal welfare is the way to go. Don't open that door any further. It will not help animals, that's for sure.
Gentleman in the back.
So, at one point, dogs had to be domesticated. At one point, they weren't always the captive little things that we pet, right? There were wolves at one time. Ball pythons is one I'm going to speak highly about because they've been bred for between 25, 30, 50 years now. Not too sure, but 30 plus for sure. I've kept over 5 to 10 in my lifetime, and each and every one I could see a distinct personality. Now people say these animals are supposed to be wild, but when a python comes out of its hide to look for you, and the minute you enter the room, it sees you, wanders around, comes to you, that's affection. There's no other way around it. It was hiding, it came out, checked to see I was here, came towards me. Dogs do that too. Some snakes do that. I'm not saying all snakes do that, but some do. So some have been captive bred for long enough that they are actually considered captive, not wild as most people think.
Animals are generally sentient.
Go back and
They
forth.
have,
I want
feelings.
to avoid the back and forth. It's hard for people on Facebook to also follow, but gladly I just secrets this. Continue.
Also, another one, monitor lizards. They've been scientifically proven to be as smart as a dog. But no one's talking about that because they're the bigger species, which means they're smarter. Bigger brain, bigger whole system, basically. They've been known to go and be potty trained, go to the bathroom, go to the litter box, poo, come to the bowl, eat their food, drink their water, come even when you call them by name. Iguanas also do that too. Some species, when they're worked with better, obviously not all of them, just like how not all dogs react the same to the same training. It's very simple. It's just a bit of common sense, and again, animal welfare plays a big part. The way you take care of it, the way you raise it from birth, and the way that people breed them plays a big part.
Sure. So first thing is very, very quickly, I agree that we're overplaying slightly the distinction between captive bred and wild caught. It's great if an animal is captive bred instead of being taken from wild, but that would in no way allay my fears of some mental. Oh, my animal's captive bred. Well, is it well taken care of? Is it just all of that absolutely should be considered, and just saying, well, captive bred doesn't tell me that. It doesn't matter to me if it's a dog. The dog is captive bred. Great. That in no way means that all animal welfare concerns are met or any other relevant concerns. So I agree with that. I want to just hit a little bit of what Marie over there from the Parrot Sanctuary touched on. A trap that I think we often fall into, and I talk about this a lot in my presentations, is we focus on, when we talk about what is an appropriate pet, not appropriate pet, what is an appropriate educational animal, not appropriate educational animal, we focus on the species. Exotic animals, whatever that means, are not appropriate pets. Parrots are not appropriate pets. Snakes are not appropriate pets. Dogs are appropriate pets. These are all statements that are riddled with difficulties as soon as you look just underneath the surface. In my presentations on parrot husbandry, I spend nearly an hour talking about the difficulties of parrots as pets. But then I was saying, well, does that mean that parrots are just bad pets, period, the end, always? No, they are among the most difficult animals, but there are cases in which they can be good pets. Are dogs always appropriate pets? No, for many people, a lot of the time they are not. The species has a lot to do with it, but the preparedness of the owner, the knowledge of the owner, the ability for the owner to pay the veterinary bills, knowing a veterinarian that can take care of that species. All of those are important considerations, and they go far beyond merely the species. I love, by the way, that you mentioned, I certainly don't hear your name, hamsters. One of my favorite things to do on stage is to compare rats and hamsters. Because a perfect scenario where hamsters are considered to be cute, I bring out a rat to a school and people go, ew, where by every objective standard, the rat is a much better pet, both in terms of safety, in terms of the happiness of the animal, and everything else. And it has nothing to do with how cute or cuddly or colorful the animal is. So those are all important distinctions. Just very last, I want to touch on CAS accreditation. We have had a couple of people in this meeting and the last meeting call it meaningless, just a club, just a marketing tool. This is false, and I want to very quickly illustrate why this is false. However, I want to just preface that by saying that as a CASA accredited institution, there has been a lot of discussion internally about the failings of CASA, where they have not unaccredited institutions fast enough, where they have not dealt with the PR side of things well enough. Lots of admissions of those kind can absolutely be made. However, to say that it is meaningless is very, very far off the mark, and I can illustrate with a very quick thought experiment. The City of Toronto a week from now is going to hold a large animal event with live animals, and they have a choice. We can either pick an accredited institution, of which there are about 5 or so that do outreach programs. We're going to put all of their names in a hat, and they can pick one of those from random, or, in the other hat, we can put the 70 or so unaccredited institutions. I guarantee everyone from city staff is going to be rushing for that accredited hat, not because every accredited institution is perfect, but to suggest that there is no difference in standards between something like the Toronto Zoo or Little Rays or Reptilia, and all of the backyard, basement-run institutions is very, very far off the mark. But I totally agree, going forward, a blanket CASA exemption is perhaps not the way to go, but CASA accreditation can definitely be part of a much longer list that includes CASA accreditation, proof of liability insurance, and just very quickly to touch on something you said, oftentimes when you came up with things like, well, obviously animal welfare is a concern, but isn't that already covered by like SPCA inspections? There are other things that cover this, but apparently if you say that it's very easy to avoid that, who cares if it's redundant? Let's add that proof of SPCA inspection. Add that to the list. Although CASA accreditation requires submission of things like, what are your care standards? What are your infection control policies? What are your handling rules? Although those are all covered by CASA, what's the harm in also requiring that to be your annual submitted paperwork to the city as well? And then if an incident comes up, the city can say, were they following the rules that they said they were going to follow or not? And that could be a mechanism by which you can regulate professional institutions with documented standards versus less so.
I have a hand over here, but before I go to this person over here, just a couple of things. We do have a comment form, so if you don't want to raise your hand and provide any feedback, you could also fill out the comment form. It's in the back, and you can hand that in at the end. You could also send myself an email with your feedback. I'll share my email account afterwards. And thirdly, you could also fill out our online survey and provide your feedback that way. There's been some great discussion, and we're getting valuable information back from you, and this is really what the purpose of this public consultation is all about. I also want to recognize the people on Facebook and say, everyone who's tuning in from wherever you are. The hashtag is AnimalRulesTO, and continue the great questions that are coming in. Our staff is working away at trying to answer as many questions as they come in as possible. So before I go over here, is there anyone who has yet to speak that would like to speak? Okay, that's all.
I just wanted to extend on what I don't remember his name, sorry, from the Toronto Zoo, having the idea that we need to really get over the idea that a child, an individual, needs to touch and feel and hold something, an animal, and whatever it is, to have a love for it or to have a respect for it. I mean, I've been teaching for almost 50 years.
Marineland, and that was a long time coming, let me tell you. As I just spoke in Parliament to a bill to ban whales and dolphins in captivity on April 11th, and they sat up there and said that they accredit Marineland, so that I was like, what? So yeah, that was a very long time coming, but apparently they do not accredit Marineland anymore. I just wanted to say, with this domestic and wild thing, I just cannot wrap my head around that some people are saying that because an animal is born in captivity, or if they're taken from the wild and held in captivity for a long time, that they're somehow domesticated now, and I really don't think that matters. I mean, we're talking about the welfare of animals here, whether they're domesticated or not domesticated, and certainly none of these animals we're talking about here today are domesticated by any means. Certainly, 30 years is nowhere near the amount of time to domesticate an animal. I have there's a whale at Marineland that knows me, and we have played games and stuff through the thing. She knows me. Is that whale domesticated? Is she a domesticated whale because she knows me? No. Is a lion that's in a circus show that recognizes his trainer a domesticated lion now? No, like that's just ludicrous. And getting back to George's point here about the museums, children going to museums to see things. These artifacts in museums, like, are people allowed to pick and prod at artifacts? No. You don't need to touch and feel and appreciate these things, these animals, to love them and to want to help them in the wild. We appreciate ancient artifacts, but are we allowed to touch them? No. There's no need to.
hand in the back.
So, kind of going on like what this lovely lady said over here about the nocturnal side. Some animals are obviously nocturnal, should not be taken out during the day. That is true, but it also does fit some people's lifestyles. For example, I have a bad case of insomnia by the doctor, so I stay up most of the time. I don't even go to sleep. My hedgehog's awake the whole night, so that's why I got a hedgehog, because it suits my needs. Not needs, but per se my lifestyle. So again, you're like, the animal that you have should fit into your lifestyle. You shouldn't be going against its lifestyle to make you happy, and then you shouldn't go against your lifestyle to make it happy. It should fit both of you, per se.
A hand over here.
I was just going to comment a bit on the whales, and for instance, the Royal Interior Museum right now has this fantastic exhibit of whales, and I think as we so much as sort of primates want to touch animals and have relationships with them, I think seeing the kids, for instance, at the ROM, not necessarily my own, engaged in very creative, interactive games or what have you, is hugely beneficial. So again, not opposed or for, but I mean, anytime, if we look here, there's not anytime soon are we going to have a whale on the list. So just keeping in mind maybe some appropriate animals. But again, I just like to stress that I think sometimes there are very, very interesting and creative ways that we can sort of satiate that need to have interactions or to learn more about animals by having creative programs like the one, for instance, currently at the ROM.
Thank you. And over here.
Sure, so I just want to address a very common thing that gets said over and over, which is there is no need to touch animals. You can do, after all, education without any contact with animals. And although this may have a veneer of reasonableness on the surface, it is not a line of argument that we ever use. I mean, usually the argument that we've heard kind of follows this. We've identified 70 institutions that go around with animals. There are risks with these, like diseases, etc. And after all, there's no need for these. Therefore, get rid of them, just ban them. However, in every other context where we think about activities in schools or anything else, this is not what we do. You can say, you know, in 1,000 classrooms across Toronto right now, there are chemistry teachers that handle dangerous chemicals with their kids, like hydrochloric acid and everything else. We can identify a very long list of very, very real risks. We can go on and say there's no need for this. You can write out all of the equations for the chemical reactions on the board. If you want something more exciting, watch a video of those chemical reactions, but there's no need to actually be handling those chemicals. We can repeat this for 100 different scenarios. Contact sports, a lot of very real risks to that. You can get all the fitness and team building benefits without them. But no one would then say, therefore ban. You would ask further questions saying, well, who's allowed to be conducting those ones? Are you a qualified chemist? Are you a qualified coach? Are you wearing safety equipment? Are you not wearing safety equipment? What are the incidence rates like? Is there a way that we can do this that fairly mitigates the risks? And this is an activity that is only in the hands of a professional operator. Do we say, no, there's no difference. The trained coach, the trained chemist, the general public, all the same. This is not what we generally do. So I'm worried that what we're at risk of doing here is making that kind of mistake, saying, biologist at the Toronto Zoo, random person with a lion in his backyard, it's all the same. We can identify a risk, say it's possible to do education without it, but it's also possible to do education safely with it. And there is a very small subset of qualified educators that can run these programs safely with animal welfare in mind. The key is to have, like with all of the other cases, regulation that smartly looks at who is doing the programs, what is considered not a ban, which is exactly what we would do in every other case.
So we're going to unfortunately have to wrap up on that last note. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to encourage you to continue to provide your feedback by visiting our website, toronto.ca/MLS-have-your-say, to fill out the survey and to provide any direct feedback. My email account is provided here. And you can also, by signing up in the back, be kept updated on when the report will go live. So you can see the report, and then you will have opportunity to go to License Standards Committee and dispute, as well as to submit a written submission to the committee for consideration. I want to conclude by thanking you for coming here and for participating. This is very good. It's been very helpful for us. This will help form our policy decisions. I want to thank everybody who participated using Facebook, and hope that they this is our first time trying this out, so please give us your feedback and let us know how this worked. And again, I'd like to wrap up by thanking you all for coming out tonight. Thank you so much. I'll stick around if you have any questions or as well. Oh, and your comment cards, if you have them, please provide them to me. My name is Mohammed Shurya. I'm the Senior Policy and Research Officer for Municipal License Standards. I want to thank you for participating in our Prohibited Animals public consultation. Please continue the conversation by visiting our website, toronto.ca/MLS Have Your Say. You can fill out our survey. It closes on May the 5th. And also feel free to leave your comments right below, and we will take them into consideration. Once again, thank you for participating in the public consultations on prohibited animals.